So we've talked about the importance of conversations and tackling tough issues. Something that Innerfire is really passionate about is the family and family discipleship, and being willing to be open to these conversations. So for a family that wants to be more engaged in discipleship, more open to conversations, how do you recommend starting that?
As basic as it sounds, people just need to start talking. And I'm afraid that in the busy American lifestyle that too many families don't have dinner together anymore. The dinner table is a great place to start a conversation. But if families are not able to come together at dinner and just start a conversation, it's as simple as that, talking with one another, then they need to find a time to do it. If they're riding to school, they're riding to a ball game, they're going to a music lesson, they're going over to grandma's, whatever, whenever the family finds itself together, you need to turn off the radio, turn off the news, and have a conversation about what's going on in one another's lives. I'm afraid, Hannah, that we have forgotten as a family, and especially as parents, that it's our role to disciple our kids, and that is a responsibility that cannot be delegated. I'm afraid we've tried to delegate the discipling of our children to the church. We've tried to delegate it to private schools or public schools or to some other institution, and we simply cannot do it. Discipling our kids that responsibility belongs to us. And when I look at families today, I see dads teaching their kids how to play basketball. I see them involved in all kinds of extracurricular activities, and we've got this mindset with those extracurricular activities that we've got to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, right? We've got to be as involved as everybody else is. And somewhere in the mix there, that we forget that we need to spend more time teaching our children about spiritual issues than we do about sports, than we do about music, than we do about history. Just name a subject that occupies our time. Certainly we need to be more engaged in spiritual issues than we are just having fun and doing recreation, right? So we need to recognize that, and then parents need to start having those conversations. Once you're having basic conversations, then we can move on to harder subjects. We can integrate the reading of the Word daily with our families. And some people may say, well, that's where you need to start. And, I can make that argument. But I guess my position is, if you're not able to just sit down and have a conversation about the day in a more than a surface level way, picking up the Bible and reading it might not be the best place to start. You got to develop that relationship to be able to talk before you get into more difficult subjects.
And just to clarify, it feels like there's a lot of clarifications happening on this podcast, but I just want to say we are not opposed to being engaged in lots of extracurriculars. I think more the point we want to emphasize is, are you measuring the quote-unquote success of your child by their success in sports, their GPA? How many clubs are they involved in? Is that how you're measuring your child's, overall well-being? Or, are you paying attention to their spiritual lives at all? Because we know that at the end of the day, in eternity, the Lord isn't going to care, how good were they at football. It's what were they doing for Christ, and how were they following Christ. So,
well, if I could just interject one thing there, Hannah, you mentioned us gauging the success of our kids by those things. I think by extension what we're really doing is gauging our own success as a parent.
Yeah.
Right? If our kids are a great athlete or a great musician or have a great GPA, somehow or another we project that back onto ourselves and say, oh, I've been a successful parent. So we really need to reevaluate.
No, that's a very very modern American way of looking at things.
Absolutely. So we need to reevaluate our standard of success. And at the top of that list should be, have I laid a spiritual foundation for my child? And do they understand it? Have they grasped onto that? And are we producing? We can't save our kids. We can only lay that foundation. Salvation is a work of God. But we can lay that foundation for them, and that certainly should be what we're looking at as a measure of, are we succeeding as a parent?
And something else I would say, just to clear up any confusion, when we say talking, I'm sure everyone on this podcast hopefully talks to their family. If you don't talk at all, there's a deeper issue there. But when we are talking about these conversations, we don't mean where are we eating lunch, how did the Titans play yesterday, what's going on at school. We mean talking about spiritual things. What have you been learning in the Word? What has God been teaching you? What are you struggling with right now? How are your friendships? These are the real things of life that we see a lot of families, for whatever reason, not engaging in. So that's something that we would love to see change.
And Hannah, I think just in a broader sense, especially when I was pastoring, I thought to myself, we're going to church, we're gathering together to be encouraged in our faith, to learn about God, to be uplifted so that we can go out into the world and live out our faith. And we would come into church and we would talk about what the weather was doing. As you mentioned, how's our favorite sports team doing? What's going on with the kids? Where'd you go on vacation? And it was so rare. I mean, it's sad to say, but it was so rare for somebody to come in and say, tell me what God's doing in your life. What has God challenged you with out of the Word this week?
People are scared to say that, which is ridiculous, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, those are the kind of conversations that we should be having at church. Those should translate into our families, and then that should equip and enable us to go out into the real world and have those same kind of conversations. So hopefully that's what this podcast can help develop, and what Innerfire as a ministry can help develop and support.
I think, if Christians aren't talking to one another about their spiritual lives, how on earth do we ever think that we are going to be able to talk to lost people about what God is doing in our lives if we can't talk to other Christians about it?
That's a huge point, Hannah, because, again, I've been in church all my life. From the time I can remember up until now, there is a fear of people sharing their faith. Very few people ever lead someone to Christ. And I'll tell this story just because it struck me. This was just recently this happened. I was talking to a pastor, and he was telling us about something they were doing to evangelize. And while they were out, they were talking to different people and trying to engage them in a faith conversation. Well, there was a person who was on staff at the church. This was actually the staff of the church doing the evangelism. Okay, so they were out in the community doing this evangelism. Somebody that a staff member was talking to began to show interest in salvation, and so the staff member basically hollers down for the pastor, "Hey, get down here!" Which it was comical on one hand, but sad on another hand, in that we've got a staff member of the church wanting the pastor to have to be there to lead this person to faith, to salvation. Where certainly that staff member should have been totally 100% comfortable in sharing the gospel and leading that person to Christ. And so if we have staff members in our churches that are not comfortable doing that, then what would we expect from the lay people, right? And, So again, if we can't have spiritual conversations amongst ourselves as believers, how in the world are we going to go out and confront non-believers and have those same conversations? So very good point.
I feel like the church is, we've talked about this before, we become so insular, without meaning to. And it's so easy, like, I know I'm so guilty of this, to lose any focus at all on sharing the gospel with the lost, because we just get so focused on what's going on with me in my own spiritual life, what's going on at my church, and we forget about the millions of lost people around us. Actually, in my church, just recently, a young man whom my Sunday school teacher had been praying for years, who was very skeptical about faith, actually came to Christ in a pretty miraculous way. And it was just so encouraging to our whole Sunday school class. And something my teacher said is, we just don't see this happen very often.
Right.
When's the last time that you saw a lost person, just miraculously come to faith in this way that we can rejoice over? It's so uncommon, unfortunately, and I feel like a lot of that is on us.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be uncommon, but it is, and we need to get back there. And that's how, when things like that happen, we begin to see the church having an impact. Mm-hmm. When those things are not happening, the church is not having an impact. And so hopefully we can help with that. We're not here to condemn anybody. We're not here to put the church or anybody else down. We're here to try to be real about problems, all right, to call out a problem when there is a problem, but we're more interested in solutions and how we can bind together and help to solve these than we are about naming problems, right? So we hope that comes across. We hope you see our heart in that, and we hope moving forward we're able to be a change agent and a catalyst for bringing about some of those solutions.